Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. And we welcome you to our Lunch and Learn hosted by the Arkansas Alumni Association and the Bumpers College. Also, thank you to our panelists who will be participating today. We have an awesome group of panelists who will be discussing the ripple effect of COVID-19 on the food supply chain. During the panel discussion, if anyone has questions from the audience, please place them in our chat, and we'll try to get to them during the question and answer period at the end of the agenda. All right, so first panelist that we'll have will be Dr. Gary McDonald. I'll give you a brief introduction of Gary. So Dr. McDonald earned his bachelor's and master's in floriculture and his PhD in horticulture, all from Texas A&M University. He teaches in the landscape horticulture curriculum, plant propagation, and special topics. His background includes owning and operating a landscape installation company and research in tropical horticulture, plant nutrition, field and greenhouse rose production, nursery production, and water quality stormwater runoff. McDonald has served as chair of the Bumpers College AFLS Curriculum Committee and chairs the Department of Horticulture's Undergraduate Curriculum Committee. He oversees the undergraduate student internship program and acts as the lead in the Department Curriculum Assessment Plan. His research focuses on the development and use of resource-efficient landscape plants, native plant development, stormwater runoff control and treatment, and the history of the relationship between man and plants. In 2019, he earned a National Role Model Award from Minority Access after being nominated by a Bumper student. He has also earned Faculty Gold Medal and Outstanding Mentor Awards from U of A's Office of National Competitive Awards, and the Teaching Award of Merit from Gamma Sigma Delta, the Honor Society of Agriculture. Without further ado, I introduce Dr. Gary McDonald.
Thank you, Dean Fields, and good afternoon, everyone. You may be wondering why an ornamentalist and mainly a landscape guy is talking about local foods. Well, I guess I can say that I actually started out as a kid with the vegetable gardening and just kind of migrated to other areas. But really over the last several years, as I've kind of become more involved with some of the local, both producers and people that are involved in the culinary industry, I've really kind of developed a real interest in that interface between local producers and mainly the restaurant industry, because there's a great demand for that and a great interest. So my little short segment, I'm going to take this from a horticultural point of view. I know that Drew is going to be talking about poultry and animals, and then Todd will be talking about one of the restaurants. So kind of what I wanted to talk about, now these are going to be really more vegetable crops, small fruits, those things. I'm not talking, commodity crops, the big stuff. And so this lends itself really well to local production because it's smaller scale. We're not talking hundreds of acres. We may be talking anywhere from an acre to maybe 4 acres. So it's something that people who are looking to get into this kind of a production, it's not going to cost them an arm and a leg having to go out and buy a lot of land if they have access to small land. And so that's kind of from I'll kind of talk about from a producer's aspect, and then also because COVID it's kind of been a double-edged sword for horticulture this year. And so I kind of want to address some of the concerns or maybe some of the opportunities that the local homeowners have actually had. And then kind of how this has impacted some of our initiatives that, we've been trying to get going or wanting to get going on that more of a collaborative effort between academia, research, producers, and the local food industry. So, of course, obviously, when COVID hit, it immediately shut down a lot of restaurants. And we were really beginning to have a pretty good infrastructure of some of our more high-end restaurants, locally owned restaurants that were really interested in local foods. And of course, no notice, they all got sent home. And so that really, put a real stopper in where this local produced food was going to go, because those normally marketing chains had all of a sudden been eliminated. And so this whole system kind of been built up on relationships between smaller producers, restaurants, farmers markets, all that sort of thing. So that was a real struggle for a lot of producers, because all of a sudden they had to find an alternative market for these produce, which they'd already gotten, in the ground and was going now. Some of them were able to kind of pull back on that because, it was sort of early in the season, but still, they had already their plans for this. And so that was, that was a real issue was, okay, what are we going to do with this now that we can't, our normal suppliers have, or our normal consumers are not in the market right now. And Todd will probably address this a little bit more, but one of the things, particularly with the smaller local restaurants, they adapted very, very quickly. Now, whether it was takeout meals on a very limited basis, or after they were allowed to reopen a little bit, there was a couple that did just special tastings. They were outdoors, limited crowds, socially distanced. And so at least it allowed them to, at least bring their employees, their highly trained chefs and wait staff back into some sort of a job. And of course, we're still kind of in that transition. But I was really impressed with some of the innovative ideas that, particularly some of these younger people that are in the restaurant business, that were able to actually, actually overcome and are still overcoming on a daily basis. So that was the major impact of COVID on our local scene. Was all of a sudden nobody was buying anything, and particularly if you're thinking about hydroponic crops, particularly hydroponic lettuce, that's almost like a building automobiles. Once you start at one end, it's going to keep coming down the pipeline. And then when it comes out the other end, you got to do something with it. It's, highly perishable crop. It's not something that you can or really process. So I know that was a real struggle for some of our hydroponic operations. And so that was the main thing. Homeowners, it was kind of a different thing. I think we all remember the panic buying that went on, at least here back in March and early April, when, it looked like, coming kind of from the Gulf Coast where we had a lot of hurricanes come through, you got a tropical storm warning, the grocery stores were wiped out immediately. And so we had that same deal. And so I think because there was some sort of really a feeling of food insecurity, that people started planting their own gardens. And I know that if you look at the data from garden centers, they've had a banner year. They literally they couldn't supply enough product. And even today, the garden centers, it's kind of hard to find transplants. So in one way, I think part of the reaction, at least on a very, very local, even in your own yard, was where people started producing their own food. And of course, as a horticulturist in our line of work, we hope this is not just a one and done deal. We hope people will, enjoy getting back to growing their own food, and at least, if nothing else, at least have an appreciation. If you were to had an abysmal failure this year with your home garden because you've never done it before, hope at least it'll give you a little bit of appreciation for what it does to actually grow these vegetable crops and small fruit crops and things like that. So there again, that's why I think it's kind of been a little bit of a double-edged sword. Obviously, it's been a catastrophe for so many people, but at least for at least a small segment of the economy, it really has kind of been a good thing for horticulture, just because, that. And another thing was, landscaping. We often find that when economic times are hard, or you have these kind of situations, that people realize they're not going to be going on vacation, they're not going to be traveling, and so they know they're going to be stuck at home, and so then they'll fix up their yard. And I know a lot of people this year that normally would have done that, they incorporate a whole lot more vegetables instead of, say, marigolds or petunias. And even in my own landscape, I kind of did that same thing. I had a lot more peppers and lettuce, and sad to say, the frost we had a couple of weeks ago took out my pepper supply. So I'm going to have to go back to buying, like everybody else, and buying peppers in the supermarket. So that way it was kind of a boon for our local, homeowners anyway. They were able to grow a lot of their own food, and maybe took a little bit of the sting out of some of the price increases that they might have had. And then lastly, I'll just kind of mention a little bit that, there are several initiatives that we're looking at, and even we've kind of gotten underway in horticulture. We're actually starting a farmer training program. It's called CAF. It's the Center for Arkansas Food and Farms. that's we have a greenhouse facility that's just now beginning, that's almost complete, just about, processing shed. And so this actually involves a curriculum of people who either want a second career, or it's also aimed at veterans, different groups of people who would like to get into smaller scale horticultural farming. And so while this is not necessarily geared to local production, most of these newly trained farmers probably will start out at a very, very small scale until they can kind of get comfortable. So there again, this is going to be another pipeline of people producing local foods for local markets. And so, and then also, I think there's a real interest there. Again, Todd might expand on this a little bit, but you know, there's that interest, like I mentioned, kind of that interface between producers, consumers, the culinary industry, and how we in research and academia can kind of foster those relationships and supply the technical knowledge or whatever that they need. And so that's something I think, you know, I think we'd all like to pursue. So I guess just kind of summing up, it's kind of been good and bad. I think bad for a lot of the economy, but I think it's certainly it's helped horticulture, and I think in the long run the local food movement will be even stronger. I don't think that's going to go away because uh, restaurants certainly appreciate the high quality. Now we've got some, you know, reliability issues we have to deal with, and of course you always have to deal with food safety and all those kind of issues. But I think, you know, I think once everything reopens and restaurants can get back to 100% capacity, then I think we'll see this demand for local food take off even greater. So I'm going to stop right there, Dean, and we can take some questions, and we'll just hold them to the end, whatever you guys want to do.
Yep. We'll try to hold the questions to the end so we can ask everyone. So thank you, Dr. McDonald, for that. It was very informative. But now we're going to move along and introduce Dr. Drew Parker. Dr. Parker is a senior technical service veterinarian with Fibro Animal Health in Fayetteville after previously working with Zoetis and Alpharma, where he handled accounts with Tyson Foods, Golden Plump, Ag Partners, Pilgrim's Pride, Wayne Farm, and more. He earned his bachelor's degree in poultry science from the U of A in 2005 and became a board certified diplomat of the American College of Poultry Veterinarians in 2011. Parker is a member of the American Veterinary Medical Association and the Arkansas Veterinary Medical Association Poultry Division, American College of Poultry Veterinarians, American Association of Avian Pathologists, and the Poultry Federation. He's also on the AVMA Board of Trustees, among other things. In 2005, while an undergraduate, he was the National Poultry and Egg Association Student of the Year at IPPE in Atlanta. He also earned the 2008 AAAP Foundation Kenneth Esklin Preceptorship Grant and was a 2008 Arkansas Veterinary Medical Foundation Scholar. Dr. Parker will be talking about the effect on the poultry and animal production industry. Without further ado, Dr. Parker.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction and thank you for having me here today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the poultry industry and how it's affected us, large scale operation with vertical integration. So it's one little ripple effect can go a long way. The first thing I'd like to start out by, I think it's important for us to just kind of go over what coronavirus is, and let's see what coronavirus, how it is different in humans as it is in birds, or will it affect both? The industry, poultry industry, has been dealing, it's no stranger to the poultry industry, the coronavirus itself. There are several diseases that we get in our avian species, such as infectious bronchitis virus and viral turkey virus. And those are both coronavirus. It's enteric in the turkeys, and it's a respiratory virus in chickens. We've been dealing with it for decades, and it's an endemic virus that the birds get, and we vaccinate for. The virus itself, I think we need to know that it's a single-stranded RNA virus, and it's envelope, which envelope means that it can be easily killed. Something that disrupts that envelope will kill the virus easily. So most disinfectants, washing your hands, utilizing hand sanitized, etc., it can die fairly easily with that envelope. What's unique about the virus is they have spike proteins, or these proteins that attach to the host cell receptors. The receptors and the spike proteins are both different for the human coronaviruses and the avian viruses. So it is very highly unlikely for one species to get and transmit it to the other. So that being said, we can move forward and kind of talk about the impact of the poultry business from the coronavirus itself. So the poultry business is a really large business. We're talking about 1.98 million jobs, $109 billion in wages, and generate about $500 billion in the economic impact in the United States alone. Here in Arkansas, it's about number 2 in broiler production. We have number 5 in turkeys. So that's important to know for our state itself. We produce 7.4 billion pounds, and it's about 163,000 jobs on 6,500 farms here in Arkansas. With how that affects these farms and how it affects us traveling as professionals and professionals working together, we've had to deal with canceled meetings, conventions, customer visits, people working from home, having travel restrictions for the airlines, and going from state to state, going from country to country. That allows us, or it is kind of in advantage to us, because it makes us have to do things from a isolated place and not actually be able to hold, touch, and really see what's wrong with our animals. The interactions themselves also decrease the amount of research and the education that we get. So it can lead some lead time to putting in the right parameters to defeat those factors. I think when talking about the poultry industry and how this virus actually affects the operations itself, I think it's important to probably just dissect it into 2 halves. You have a live side, and then you have a processing side and transportation side, if you will. For the live side, we've been practicing. I think the poultry industry is probably one of the leading practicing biosecurity and vertical integration, and is certainly on the front runner for doing that a long time ago. And we've established a lot of parameters that we currently do, and having the coronavirus has led to us even putting in more things that we do. A few things that we do in order to combat and to have good biosecurity is vertical integration. We have all-in, all-out system. So, and birds that go in are the same age as they come out, and then they don't intermingle with each other at different ages. Then we have suiting up. The technical broiler guys will go out and they will wear coveralls, hairnets, face paddings or mask, and everything on every farm, and change those out so we don't transfer one disease to another farm. And they have certain routes that they go for those farms and each day in order to keep that at a minimal risk. That we wash our vehicles regularly, especially from going from complex to complex or company to company. We make sure that everything is sanitized and clean. We have some shower in, shower out facilities, especially in the genetic side, with Avigen and Cobb and their great grandparents and grandparents, etc. We have farm security sign-in sheets at each farm. And due to the coronavirus, we put in all these parameters to help combat it and help keep transmitting anything from place to place. So when coronavirus came about, it's kind of the same process and the same frame of mind. So we caught up pretty quick as far as the live side and the bird side. With now, when we move back to the processing side, it's a little different. We're dealing with people in close quarters, working on lines and chains in the processing side, and we have seen some of our plants get disrupted, and that has decreased the amount of supply chain that we were able to get out. And there were several measures taken, and we're caught back up now in a lot of aspects. And there was a little bit of history as far as the food supply and things that we're dealing with right now as far as the business matters go. In late last year, we had the USMCA, United States, Mexico, and Canada trade agreement, and that has helped us have access and to export our chickens within the North America region. And so that has helped with the poultry industry here. We had China lift a ban on the poultry products that have been going on since around 2015. So that allowed us to increase our exports to China. And it was about $1 billion businesses on pause alone. And it was about a potential $1 billion for leg, thighs, and breasts as well. So that's going to give us an outlet to send some of our chicken as well. African swine fever in China also decreased the amount of protein they have available. So that has also helped to give chicken a market over in China. The U.S.-China regionalization for high path and low path AI for biosecurity and diseases that's been signed, and that will state that U.S. can be in a regional and China region if they have a high path or virulent Newcastle disease. We can still trade. It also eliminates if you have a low path AI that you'll still be able to trade, utilize those products in that region. With the processing plants, so I'll focus on the processing plants for a minute and how that affects us. Obviously, decreasing processing facilities leads to longer for birds to process, lower output, that slows down the system and decreases the number of breeders and number of placements that we're actually currently doing. And so that leads to extended out time for the hen growers and the broiler growers, which means that they may have one less cycle go through, which means less money in their pocket. So that's hit the growers for a time period. The processing plant, it was recorded in November. I think we're moving in the right direction. That they had the lowest injuries and illness in the manufacturing facilities. It was like 3.2 people out of 100. It was around 5.7 this time last year. So I believe we're moving in the right direction that way. I think we're catching up and utilizing what we need to at the processing plants themselves. When we first got hit with COVID, it pulled back our supply, and we were learning to deal with sickness within the manufacturing facilities. When this happened, the president signed an executive order to the meat and poultry producers to continue operations consistent with the CDC and OSHA. And what that did is the CDC was advised the critical infrastructure employees, which are considered meat and poultry producers, be permitted to work following potential exposure to COVID-19, provided they remain asymptomatic, and additional precautions were implemented and put into place within the facilities and the community. So we did a lot of community awareness on social distancing. We're wearing protective gear, face coverings, shift staggering to keep certain populations together and away from others. Health screenings, training and awareness for the communities before they come into work, and financial incentive to not report to work if you're sick. To say that if you're sick, we want you to stay home and we will provide for you. And increased cleaning and disinfection in the plants, temperature checks, and plastic dividers between stations all helped to help control what we were seeing in the plant, and we're back to speed there, and it kept us going and moving and filling our orders. The last thing I'd like to talk about is we're obviously affected by consumer habits, and a recent study, National Chicken Council and an analyst organization, we're running numbers to see how COVID-19 affected the consumer market. During COVID, while people were at home and on their phones, the number one quarantined tweet out there was the name chicken. So that is, a lot of people are seeing the diversity in cooking chicken and learning to make new meals and to do that from home. And chicken was the number one protein utilized in quarantine. The last 9 months, retail chicken sales have increased 1.3 billion or 19.5% from last year. 50% of the people who eat chicken claim to eat more during COVID-19. And easy to prepare. I mean, it's easy to prepare. You can prepare it in a diverse number of ways, fried, grilled, and it's become a staple in people's diets. 50% of the people that were asked in the survey, the analysis, said that they increased eating chicken at home versus going out. And then 50 out of 50 of the people like grilled over fried, and 50 of 50 boneless for bone-in. So there's no real difference there. And 2 out of 5 people claim the breast meat is their favorite, followed by 20% wing and 17% thigh. And then drumstick was at 14. I'll end by just saying there's no evidence that COVID-19 is transmitted on food and food packaging at this time. But we just would like everybody to know out there, stay safe, wash your hands, and do everything you do to make sure we keep hygienic and to keep this thing at bay. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. And nothing else, you have everybody hungry and ready to eat some chicken now. So we appreciate it. And last but not least, we want to introduce Todd Martin. Todd Martin grew up on the family dairy farm in South Arkansas and knows about long hours, hard work, innovation, and a love for the land. He earned his degree in ag economics and worked in commodities with Merrill Lynch before moving to Sibagagi, a legacy company of Syngenta. Since 1990, he has been involved in domestic and global roles encompassing seed, traits, and crop protection areas of the agricultural sector, working in sales, marketing, and business development on every continent. After retiring from Syngenta, he opened a consulting business specializing in management and advisory services and has worked with Cerebus Capital Management, Blackstone, Stevens Inc., and Inari Inc., among others. He founded several companies, including Earth Optics, a soil sensing company using ground penetrating radar to analyze soil compaction in production agriculture. In 2020, he founded South by Northwest Hospitality and acquired 3 Northwest Arkansas restaurants. In addition to Southern Food Company, an original concept, he and his wife Marty also run Theo's and Eastside Grill. Martin is CEO of the Independent Professional Seed Association and a commissioner on the Fayetteville Advertising and Promotion Commission. Now, he'll be talking about the effects of COVID from a restaurant owner's perspective. Without further ado, Todd Martin.
Thank you, Dean Fields. And good afternoon, everyone. Y'all heard some good information, already about the pandemic and how the effect has gone on. I'll play back a little bit of the concepts that Dr. McDonald has gone through with you. And especially from a restaurant owner standpoint, I think everyone has become very familiar with what's happened in the supply chain. And we're even seeing those ripple effects again. If you've watched as of late, guess what? Toilet paper is again hard to find. So I've seen that already coming in for some different things within Walmart. I know my wife was over at Sam's Club. No paper towels, no toilet paper at Sam's Club in Fayetteville. So if you're on this call and you're not in Fayetteville, you need to immediately get off this call when we're through, run right to Walmart, buy your toilet paper, because you never can tell when you'll be able to see it again if it's there. What does that have to do with what's been going on in the food industry, and especially with restaurants? Well, look, you've already heard about what's going on in the poultry industry. Back early in the pandemic, we're all aware of rumors of chicken shortages because Tyson plants and other poultry plants, and I'm not picking on Tyson's at all, were getting shut down because we saw things happening like, more infections in close quarters, and the industry has adapted to that. We've heard things about, you know, you'd go into the grocery store and you'd see shortage of beef one week and pork the next and chicken. All of that had happenings rooted in the pandemic, not just because of production issues that were going on, but because of a substantial change in the supply and demand in areas within our industry. So what we saw in the restaurant industry, shockingly, were very, very few shortages of items that we could not get hold of at any time. We did see a tremendous price increase across the board on all protein products, on all animal proteins, whether it was poultry, lamb, pork, or beef. You know, all those went up just as we saw them reflected in the grocery stores. We also saw that around eggs. So we saw a substantial increase in pricing, but we did not see the shortages that I think that we all experienced in the grocery store. And then, of course, we'll all remember back early again in the pandemic, in that April-May timeframe, dairy farmers, it's a group that's close to my heart from a historical perspective, dumping milk. And at the same time thinking, what in the world are you dumping milk for? Again, a change in the basic consumer. And in this case, what we're talking about is kids weren't in school for the whole last half of spring break on into summer. Kids weren't in school. And where do we see the major milk consumption? We see it in school. So one of the things that we learned about real quick, seeing this dichotomy of difference in between what was happening in the restaurant industry for us and what was happening actually at home, is that our supply chains were strained because our food supply chains absolutely go in different areas. You have almost a dedicated production all the way back to the dairy farmer of a supply chain that goes to the school systems, wherever they are. Another one that goes to the restaurants, wherever they are. Another one that goes to homes. And so, you know, to the grocery store. Now, I'm putting that probably very simplistically because I see the supply chains from an end user in a couple of different aspects. I'm not a supply chain expert. As a matter of fact, I meant to point out that of all these people that have spoken today, I'm the least educated of everybody. You know, that's a point of pride for me, that I can always say I'm the least educated one. But anyway, back to the supply chain issue. We saw this from an end user standpoint, and the supply chains going in different directions. So when there was a fundamental shift that we saw, like no longer kids in school and more consumption going on at home and restaurant usage going down because there's more consumption at home, all of a sudden we had one supply chain that just could not handle the added demand, and the others that couldn't adjust from the standpoint to move over to that demand. And I have to say right now, as I look at it, I don't see that within the last several months, those channels to get food out throughout the industry have changed very much. Yes, we've gone through some processes to look to make sure that we can continue our production strength in the basic production areas, but the supply chains still are very directed and not able to quickly adapt. When you close schools and you have months where kids are now at home and there's not a school supply chain, it doesn't readily go to the grocery stores. It's packaged differently. It's a completely different concept. So that's one of the big ripple effects that I have seen going through the entire food industry. Now, of course, where does it impact restaurants? Our supply has been good. One of the things that we've had the challenge about, and you see it today, there's an immediate call right now with virus cases surging to close restaurants and bars. I'm gonna give you the restaurant guideline on here. You know, we saw a lot of that happen back early. We went through a phase, and my wife and I at that time owned Southern Food Company as our standalone restaurant. And we adjusted on the fly. You heard Dr. McDonald talk about how restaurants adjusted from dine-in practices and moving over from dine-in to curbside delivery only or takeout, and then actual delivery services. We did that at Southern Food Company. We closed the dining room area. We went to curbside only. We started upping our sanitizing practices for our people that were inside. We changed our procedures in line with the Arkansas Department of Health. One thing I got to say is when you walk into a restaurant, you always need to be confident, even in normal times. There's sanitary places. You know, we get health inspections. We sanitize everything, surfaces in between customers when they're at tables. I mean, in normal times, restaurants are very clean places, and health practices in back probably beat a lot of the health practices that we all do at home. But now with COVID and the adaptation that we've all done with mask wearing, additional glove wearing, regular hand sanitizing not only tables, but chairs, the social distancing apart, even at our 66% capacity that we're currently enabled in stage 2 of where we are in Arkansas. Even as we're looking at that, I would tell you that I'm very comfortable in restaurants that they're very sanitized areas. So why do you think that we see the call to close restaurants and bars? They're the gathering place for us to go and have a common meal. So if I invite Dean Fields and his wife Dana to my house, and we all sit down and we take our mask off, you all know this, then we're accepting the risk that each other has in our house. That's the same thing that happens when you go to a restaurant and you sit down. I think one of the things that disturbs me is we accept that common risk at home, and we forget that that common risk is out, that, also is what is driving a lot of the concept in restaurants and bar closures or paring those down. And the reason I want to call that out, with all the noise that's out there now, is to make sure that everybody understands that it's not restaurants spreading, staff members at restaurants spreading COVID to customers. It's not customers to restaurants. It's not even our staff members spreading it to one another. That could happen, but I will tell you, and now we're in 8 months of this pandemic, we have not had one instance of a staff member give COVID to another staff member. We have such strong practices in place to limit exposure in all areas. So it's the commonality of inviting others into our circle that are outside our household and trying to close down common meeting places that are driving some of these calls. I do feel very confident, and I hate to throw a rock at another business, but I will. I feel very confident in our restaurants, and of course, I know all the practices that go through them, but at the same time, I walk into, the grocery store, whether it's Walmart or any others, and walk into my home improvement store, whether it's Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever, and gotta say, I think, yeah, I'm not as comfortable here as I am eating at my own restaurant. So, I think that when we look at the effects, and I'm kind of on a little bit of a tangent here from COVID-19, I think when we look at the effects, we all have to accept, the responsibility for maintaining our health and safety with regards to our own selves. We have our own responsibility that we need to wear masks, we need to wash hands, we need to maintain our sanitary practices unto ourselves, and also be cognizant of those people that we invite into our protected bubble is what I would call that, whether that's in a restaurant, whether you're going shopping together, whether you're inviting them in home for Thanksgiving. So I think there's been a lot of effects that have happened. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the supply chain. We've talked about some of the things that are changing in the restaurant industry early on in the process. And I want to echo this particular part with Dr. McDonald, because we at South by Northwest are now looking at how we can actually source more local produce and more local products to help enable that we have a shorter grasp around our supply chain. So right now we're in the early stages of working on a project. Since we have 4 restaurants, we actually have an order of magnitude that we're now interested in developing our own farm so that we can do production there at that level from a vertical integration, and also be able to maintain what we'd like to be able to say is, all of our own standards, all of our own health standards, so that we can produce products here locally and bring right into the restaurant. And a lot of that was driven by work that's been done by Dr. McDonald at the University of Arkansas, because of some of the things that he's done with local produce and taking them into restaurants for use here. But none of that really would have gained fire had the pandemic not come along, threatened supply chains, and really changed the way that we thought about bringing food to the public. And that has happened dramatically. So we are looking now at how we can be different, how we can secure our own supplies and be more methodical about the actual supplies that we do. We're very confident in our current suppliers. We absolutely are. But as we've gone forward, and now we've had, in our business, had an opportunity to, in fact, increase our size during this pandemic, we are starting to say, okay, how can we do things better and differently? And that's one thing that, as I start to draw to a close, and I hope we have some time for some questions, that I will say I found very exciting. Marty, my wife, and I have been long backers of Bumpers College, and of course, as my alumni status, it's something that's very near and dear to our heart. But what's been very exciting to me is, as we move forward in business, we've been able to find a partner that is interested in talking to us about, what we can do in, quote, the real world to bring, better food, better products to the marketplace through our restaurant. So, that's an exciting part of being part of the university community. So I'm going to pause there, and Dean Fields, I'll flip it back over to you, and hopefully we'll have time for a few questions.
Thank you, Todd. And certainly we do have time for questions. And I want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll try to get those questions to our panelists. So we have a couple questions, and these questions are somewhat related, but kind of around our current supply chain. And so I'll ask this, and all panelists can weigh in on this. And Todd, you mentioned how agile or how our supply chain may not be as agile as it should be. So how do you think things may change if we go back into a lockdown, given the rising cases right now? And I open that up to all panelists.
Well, I don't mind starting with that. I mean, at this juncture, I'm a little bit concerned that we actually have seen any significant change at all in the supply chain, in the ability to move and switch. I think it's cognizant, but I'd probably have to say that we need to enlist our friends over at the Walton College and say, because they do have a supply chain group over there, and say, okay, what can we do more of? My concern is that that's a big question, and we've got a very integrated, just-in-time type of concept in our supply chain that's developed over decades, and it's certainly not something that I think that we can change easily or quickly. I think that the other side that the pandemic has somewhat uncovered are the expectations of products that we didn't expect, that probably in any of our lifetimes we would ever see a United States that had a shortage of. Now, we can make a lot of jokes about toilet paper, but I never really thought I'd have to stand in line for toilet paper. So I think that we have work to do there. I think that we have work to do in the area of developing strategic supplies that are actually important to the population, because I think that we've uncovered a lot in the country that we felt like we were really ready and we could do anything easily, but I think we found a few bumps that we need to continue to work on.
Other panelists.
Well, I would say, as far as vegetables and fruits, it seems like, particularly here local, it has been really much sort of a one-on-one partnership with, various restaurants, and it tends to be, either direct delivery or pickup or whatever. So we don't quite have certainly like in the poultry and the meat industry, where it's packaged and, distributed. And so, but I think as more and more people get involved, there needs to be, I hate to use the term broker, there's some terms out there people are using, but basically that kind of act as a clearinghouse, so to speak, between those that are growing and those that are wanting. And so, we can make sure that there's enough volume being produced for what the demand calls for. And then, how do you get that literally from the farm to the restaurant without going through some sort of, very rigid or traditional distribution chain that is dependent on, they have to make logistics out way in advance. They can't just change things literally hour by hour. But I think there might be an opportunity from, truly local, when we're talking about fresh produce, which is highly perishable. Maybe there could be somewhat more flexible logistical way of getting that stuff into the chain quickly, or as things change. I don't have a solution. Todd's right, we probably need to get the Walden School involved on this, but at least, from a horticultural standpoint, I think there's some opportunities of being somewhat more flexible than say maybe the meat industry.
Okay. Well, next question, I'll direct to Drew first, and then give others any chance to weigh in. Do you think that the swine and poultry industries have learned a lot from the events of the spring and have better options now to for dealing with their supplies, or kind of market demand and supplies as things change right now? So, kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we're always driven by the consumer, and then also our customers, whether it be grocery store chains or restaurants or local folks as well that we've talked about here today as well. As far as if you have a bit large operation versus a small operation, so it's a lot easier to move supplies around in a smaller operation. When you have a large operation that produces so many pounds per week, and you have people that are sick, and that assembly line slows down, then you will have less to get out. We do have chicken that's frozen over that we keep, in case we have things like this, a disruption in orders. But I think in the future, what we'll learn is to be more educated with our customers and our supply if something were to happen so abruptly like has happened here. But we have to have so many eggs to have so many chicks to have so much broiler meat out in the supply chain. So we have to adjust that sometimes.
Any others? So have there been any strategies developed for, kind of segmenting our supply chain a little more to kind of localize it? Or is it, I know at one point the whole move was toward larger and more efficient. We see in other countries around the world that they have been able to thrive even during the pandemic because of kind of smaller processing facilities in multiple areas. Has there been a move toward that at all?
As far as moving toward a smaller facility, it depends on the complex size. We do have a lot of our companies are actually in niche markets, whether they be organic or no antibiotic ever, or a few of these other divisions of the marketing cap. But that has happened, and most of those companies are smaller because it's a smaller niche group and it's a smaller market. But we've seen that market grow considerably over the last 10 years, and it's trending into a transition where their product is it needs to be unique. And so you see a lot of the no antibiotics, organic type feeding chickens out there, and they market for that.
I think one of the challenges that we found out back early too, it doesn't seem to me that there's a whole lot of from where I'm looking, there's a whole lot of opportunity to switch currently in the supply chain. I know that we were able to source some local butchers that have had absolutely phenomenal years because of so many people that started trying to get beef locally and get a side of beef, or actually go to a, someone that had cattle, whether that's from a local feedlot or a friend or whatever. And I think it seems to me that local butchers and small butchers have had a tremendous year taking care of all of that. Now, I'm not sure what everybody's going to do with all that beef in their freezer, but there's certainly been an explosion of that during the pandemic. And I think, yes, we were one of those people, and we are finding out that we eat a lot more chicken than we do beef, and we've got a whole lot of beef we need to do something with. I do think that there's going to have to be some kind of movement back into more moderate size processing facilities all up and down our supply chain. And like I said, this has been one of those things that has been uncovered, that you don't think that you can take out, an entire processing plant, by a few people getting sick, and then all of a sudden everybody in the plant's sick and you've got to shut down for an extended length of time. The only way to really secure against that is to spread out a little bit more than we are. So we're not dependent upon such large facilities. But as yet, I don't see a big movement there. And just to add one more thought, I think that Dean Fields, from my standpoint, the key learnings that are going to come at the end of the pandemic, when it's all in the rearview mirror, we need to grasp hold of and look and say, okay, what really went bad? And I think that there are things that we need to, big lessons that we're going to need to take as a society and industry-wise to say, you know what? If we're really going to have a secure food supply all the way through, regardless of what, there are things that we're going to have to change. And at times they may not be cost effective and they may not be the most efficient, but they are going to be the most secure. And I think that's something that we have to be able to grasp hold of at the end of this and make the changes at that point that will take years and changes across industry.
So you mentioned post-pandemic. So how do you think the pandemic has changed the way you'll do business in the future, just from now on? Has it had a permanent impact on the way you do business? Has it changed your model? Will you do things similar to now, or would you prefer going back to the way it was and just do things that way? So is there a permanent impact of this pandemic on the way you do business?
From a restaurant standpoint, I think that remains to be seen. I can tell you that I think curbside pickup is here to stay. I think that many restaurants outside of fine dining will continue to have curbside pickup. And I think that's a new way of doing business. I think individual store delivery with the assistance of the insurance industry is probably going to pick up. I think we've seen a lot of growth and explosion, right time, right place, and third-party delivery services. But for the restaurant industry, they're incredibly expensive. And I think the consumers don't realize not only are they paying a delivery charge at that point, but they're also, charging the restaurants on the other side too. And there's a lot of movement. I know that that's happened out on the West Coast and it's happened in New England to limit the amount of money that they can charge in third-party deliveries. And it's given more rise to individual deliveries that I think are going to end up being here and staying with online ordering. So those are two things that I think will remain for restaurants going forward. The one I don't know about is, when will people feel comfortable to go back into a restaurant that literally has 100% of the seating they had before COVID? That one, I don't know. Vaccines developed and COVID's in our rearview mirror. How long will that take before you can really walk back into, in our case, a Southern food company that can seat 88 people instead of about 50 right now? Even as I walk in and I look around at Theo's and see the way that we've reshaped Theo's for seating, it's very comfortable to me today. When we add another 30% of tables back in, are people going to feel as comfortable, even though, COVID-19 is in our rearview mirror? I don't know. That one, I think, is one that we may see some lasting changes, and people may just not be as comfortable as they were being so crowded together. And I think really where that'll have an effect is in our urban centers, where we've all been before, and you walk into a restaurant, they literally are sandwiching you in between two others and moving tables. And it'll be interesting to see where that leads us.
All right, anyone else on permanent impacts? If not, are there other questions? I see one question just came in the chat. Okay, so this question, considering the fact that food preparation from home has exploded during the pandemic, how has product usage been affected by the limits of home cooking? Does the regular consumer know how to use different cuts of meat, to use the whole animal, or to use a variety of produce that might be unfamiliar? And has this affected efficiency?
Well, my mama has taught us how to use soup bones again. But beyond that, I got to tell you, we're cooking some things that we did at our home that we didn't do previously. But I don't know that it's taught us how to do it efficiently. Thank God there's Google, right?
I would think, producing local foods, particularly again vegetables, that to be competitive, you're going to have to kind of grow some more unusual things, more unusual vegetables. The chefs tell me they'll pay premium price for something they can't get, and so I think that will be a challenge on education. Okay, how do you use some of these things? I mean, this is the first year I've ever grown kohlrabi. He's like, I don't know what to do with it. I'm going to have to consult my chef buddy. So tell me how to fix this animal that I've never grown before. So, so there again, I think that's going to be an educational challenge that, particularly we in agriculture and in the Bumpers College can help overcome. And yes, thank goodness for, for Googling food recipes.
Well, when you figure out kohlrabi, let me know, because we grew that thing too, and I still didn't figure out what to do with it.
So, okay, we have now come to about the end of our panel discussion. I just want to thank all of our attendees for participating and for your support today. And also thank you to our distinguished panelists for providing a very informative panel. This event was recorded, so if you missed something or want to go back or want to share with others, it is recorded. So again, thank you, and we appreciate you being here, and have a great day.